Question 1. Consider a national environmental labeling program that has adopted the principles of ISO 14024, 1999 for its Type I environmental labeling. To enhance consumer engagement and ensure the long-term success and credibility of the scheme, what is the most critical component of their education and awareness strategy concerning the environmental benefits communicated by the label? Option A. Focusing solely on the potential cost savings consumers might achieve by purchasing certified products, downplaying the environmental aspects. Option B. Detailing the rigorous third-party verification process and the specific life cycle stages or product attributes that the label represents. Option C. Promoting the label through broad-stroke advertising campaigns that highlight the general eco-friendliness of certified products without specific details. Option D. Providing a glossary of common environmental terms used in marketing, irrespective of their direct relation to the label's criteria. Correct answer is B. Detailing the rigorous third-party verification process and the specific life cycle stages or product attributes that the label represents. Explanation. ISO 14024, 1999, specifically in its principles and procedures for Type I environmental labeling, emphasizes the importance of robust education and awareness programs for consumers and stakeholders. These programs are not merely about informing. They are about fostering a deeper understanding of the environmental attributes being communicated and the significance of choosing products with such labels. Effective programs go beyond basic factual dissemination by explaining the life cycle impacts considered, the verification processes undertaken by third parties, and how the label contributes to informed purchasing decisions and broader environmental goals. This aligns with the standard's requirement for transparency and credibility. Without comprehensive education, the intended impact of the Type I label driving market demand for environmentally preferable products can be significantly diminished. The awareness initiatives must address the why behind the label, not just the what, thereby empowering consumers to act as agents of environmental improvement through their choices. This proactive approach ensures that the labeling scheme contributes meaningfully to sustainable consumption patterns, as envisioned by the standard. Question 2. When establishing environmental criteria for new Type I environmental labeling program under ISO 14024, 1999, for a range of household cleaning agents, what fundamental principle must guide the selection of these criteria to ensure the label's integrity and consumer trust? Option A. The criteria should prioritize aspects that are easily verifiable by manufacturers and consumers, even if they do not represent the most impactful environmental considerations. Option B. The criteria should be benchmarked against the environmental performance of leading competitors in the market, regardless of whether these benchmarks reflect the most significant environmental impacts. Option C. The criteria must be demonstrably linked to the most significant environmental impacts associated with the product category throughout its entire life cycle, as determined by a comprehensive life cycle assessment. Option D. The criteria should focus on promoting innovative product features that go beyond basic environmental performance, aiming to differentiate products through advanced technological solutions. The correct answer is C. The criteria must be demonstrably linked to the most significant environmental impacts associated with the product category throughout its entire life cycle, as determined by a comprehensive life cycle assessment. Explanation. ISO 14024, 1999, specifically in its principles for Type I environmental labeling, mandates that the criteria for product categories must be directly linked to the significant environmental impacts of that category throughout its life cycle. This ensures that the label provides meaningful information to consumers about the environmental performance relevant to the specific product. The development of these criteria involves a comprehensive assessment of the product's life cycle, from raw material extraction, manufacturing, distribution, use, and end-of-life disposal. The objective is to identify the most impactful stages and environmental aspects to establish performance standards that differentiate environmentally preferable products. For instance, for a paper product, criteria might focus on recycled content, energy used in production, and bleaching processes, as these are identified as significant impacts. Conversely, criteria unrelated to the product's actual environmental performance, such as the aesthetics of the packaging or the marketing claims made by the manufacturer, would not align with the standard's intent. The process requires transparency and consultation with stakeholders to ensure the criteria are scientifically sound, technically feasible, and address consumer needs for reliable environmental information. The relevance of criteria is paramount for the credibility and effectiveness of a Type I label, ensuring it acts as a genuine guide to better environmental choices within a given product group. Question 3. Consider a Type I environmental labeling program established in compliance with ISO 14024, 1999, a new government regulation in the European Union, Regulation EC No. 1221/2009, on the voluntary participation of organizations in a Community Eco-Label Award Scheme, IMAZ, is introduced, which mandates specific reporting requirements for environmental performance indicators that were not explicitly detailed in the original ISO 14024 program's criteria for, say, office furniture. To maintain adherence to the overarching principles of ISO 14024, particularly concerning the comprehensiveness and scientific basis of criteria, what is the most appropriate course of action for the Type I labeling program administrator? Option A. Continue with the current labeling criteria as they were established under ISO 14024, 1999, asserting that the regulation is a separate compliance requirement not directly impacting the integrity of the Type I label itself. Option B. Seek an exemption from the new EU regulation, arguing that the existing ISO 14024 certification already signifies a high level of environmental performance, making additional reporting redundant. Option C. Initiate a review and update of the existing environmental criteria for office furniture to incorporate the relevant performance indicators and reporting methodologies mandated by Regulation EC No. 1221/2009, ensuring these updates are scientifically sound and developed through stakeholder consultation. Option D. Broaden the scope of the labeling program to include all environmental management systems, effectively transforming it into a general environmental management standard rather than a specific product-focused Type I label. The correct answer is C. Initiate a review and update of the existing environmental criteria for office furniture to incorporate the relevant performance indicators and reporting methodologies mandated by Regulation EC No. 1221/2009, ensuring these updates are scientifically sound and developed through stakeholder consultation. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 14024 regarding Type I environmental labeling is the establishment of a comprehensive and transparent program that considers the entire life cycle of a product or service. This standard emphasizes that the criteria for environmental labeling must be based on scientific principles and verifiable data, ensuring that the claims made on the label are accurate and meaningful. Furthermore, it mandates that the program itself must be managed by a third party that is independent of both the manufacturer and the consumer. This independence is crucial for maintaining credibility and trust in the environmental claims. The selection of product categories and the development of specific environmental criteria for these categories must be conducted through a process that involves input from relevant stakeholders, including industry, government, and consumer groups. This multi-stakeholder approach helps to ensure that the criteria are relevant, robust, and address significant environmental impacts. The standard also requires that the environmental criteria be reviewed and updated periodically to reflect advancements in technology and evolving environmental science, thereby ensuring the continued relevance and effectiveness of the labeling program. The principle of transparency extends to the public availability of the criteria and the procedures used for certification. Question 4. Consider the development of a Type I environmental labeling program for household cleaning products, governed by the principles of ISO 14024, 1999. A critical phase involves establishing the environmental criteria for product certification. During this phase, a significant coalition of consumer advocacy groups raises concerns that the proposed criteria for biodegradability do not adequately reflect the potential for bioaccumulation in aquatic ecosystems, a concern they have articulated through formal submissions and public forums. The program management team, aiming for robust stakeholder engagement as mandated by the standard, must decide how to best address this feedback to ensure the program's integrity and market acceptance. Which of the following actions most accurately reflects the procedural requirements and spirit of ISO 14024, 1999, regarding stakeholder feedback in criteria development? Option A. Conduct a thorough scientific review of the consumer group's concerns, potentially revising the biodegradability criteria to include bioaccumulation parameters if the review substantiates the claims, and communicate these revisions and the rationale to all stakeholders. Option B. Acknowledge the consumer group's concerns in a public statement, but proceed with the initially proposed criteria, citing the need for timely program launch and the existence of other environmental attributes covered by the label. Option C. Delegate the review of the consumer group's feedback to a subcommittee composed solely of industry technical experts to ensure the criteria remain aligned with manufacturing capabilities and market realities. Option D. Immediately withdraw the proposed biodegradability criteria and initiate a completely new development process without further engagement to avoid potential delays and public controversy. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough scientific review of the consumer group's concerns, potentially revising the biodegradability criteria to include bioaccumulation parameters if the review substantiates the claims, and communicate these revisions and the rationale to all stakeholders. Explanation. ISO 14024, 1999, specifically in its principles and procedures for Type I environmental labeling, emphasizes a robust and transparent process for developing and implementing environmental criteria. A core tenet is the engagement of diverse stakeholders throughout the lifecycle of the labeling program. This includes input during the initial development of the environmental criteria, which are intended to be scientifically based and representative of a product's life cycle impacts. Furthermore, stakeholder feedback is crucial during the program's implementation phase, covering aspects such as the application of the criteria, the verification process, and ongoing program review. The standard mandates that criteria development should be conducted in an open manner, allowing for comments and revisions based on input from various parties, including manufacturers, consumers, governmental bodies, and environmental organizations. This iterative process ensures that the criteria are relevant, technically feasible, and socially acceptable, thereby enhancing the credibility and effectiveness of the Type I label. Ignoring significant stakeholder concerns, particularly those related to the scientific validity or practical application of the criteria, can undermine the program's integrity and lead to challenges in market acceptance and regulatory compliance. Therefore, a systematic approach to incorporating feedback, addressing concerns, and demonstrating responsiveness to stakeholder input is fundamental to successful Type I environmental labeling. The process is designed to foster trust and ensure that the environmental claims made through the label are reliable and meaningful to all parties involved. Question 5. When establishing the environmental criteria for new Type I environmental labeling program for reusable beverage containers, as guided by ISO 14024, 1999 principles, what is the most appropriate method for identifying the key environmental performance indicators that the criteria should address, ensuring the criteria are scientifically robust and reflect significant environmental impacts? Option A. Conducting a comprehensive life cycle assessment (LCA) to pinpoint environmental hotspots across all stages of the container's life cycle, and using these findings to define specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART, performance benchmarks for the selected indicators. Option B. Relying on expert opinion from material scientists and manufacturers to identify the most commonly discussed environmental concerns related to beverage containers, without extensive data validation. Option C. Prioritizing criteria based on current market trends and consumer perception of environmental friendliness, even if these perceptions do not directly correlate with the most significant environmental impacts identified through scientific analysis. Option D. Focusing solely on the energy consumption during the manufacturing phase of the beverage containers, as this is often a primary concern for producers, and setting stringent targets for this single aspect. The correct answer is A. Conducting a comprehensive life cycle assessment (LCA) to pinpoint environmental hotspots across all stages of the container's life cycle and using these findings to define specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART, performance benchmarks for the selected indicators. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, specifically concerning Type I environmental labeling, mandates that environmental criteria for product groups are developed based on comprehensive life cycle assessment, LCA data. This ensures that the criteria address the most significant environmental impacts across the entire product lifespan, from raw material extraction to end-of-life disposal. The standard emphasizes the importance of a scientific and transparent approach to criterion development. When utilizing LCA data, the focus is on identifying environmental hotspots and establishing performance benchmarks that drive genuine environmental improvement. This involves selecting relevant impact categories, such as global warming potential, acidification, or eutrophication, and then defining thresholds or comparative performance levels for these categories that a product must meet to qualify for the label. The process is iterative and requires input from relevant stakeholders, including industry experts, environmental organizations, and government bodies, to ensure the criteria are both technically feasible and environmentally meaningful. The selection of criteria should also consider the specific product category and its typical environmental performance, avoiding criteria that are overly stringent to the point of being unattainable or so lax that they offer no real environmental benefit. The ultimate goal is to provide consumers with reliable information about a product's overall environmental performance, enabling them to make informed purchasing decisions. This aligns with the broader objective of promoting environmentally preferable products and services. Question 6. Consider a consortium aiming to establish a Type I environmental label for a new category of portable electronic devices. To ensure the label's credibility and effectiveness according to ISO 14024, 1999 principles, which of the following actions would be most critical during the criteria development phase to guarantee the label signifies a demonstrably superior environmental performance compared to similar products not bearing the label? Option A. Conducting a comprehensive life cycle assessment, LCA, for representative products within the category, identifying key environmental impact areas and setting stringent, quantifiable performance thresholds for these areas that exceed current market averages. Option B. Prioritizing criteria based on consumer perception of environmental friendliness, even if scientific data on actual impact is limited for certain aspects. Option C. Relying on self-declarations from manufacturers regarding their environmental management systems, without independent verification of product-specific environmental performance data. Option D. Focusing exclusively on the energy efficiency of the device during its use phase, as this is the most visible environmental aspect to consumers. The correct answer is A. Conducting a comprehensive life cycle assessment, LCA, for representative products within the category, identifying key environmental impact areas, and setting stringent, quantifiable performance thresholds for these areas that exceed current market averages. Explanation: the development of criteria for a Type I environmental label under ISO 14024, 1999 is a rigorous process designed to ensure the label accurately reflects a product's reduced environmental impact throughout its life cycle. This process necessitates a comprehensive life cycle approach, examining environmental impacts from raw material extraction, manufacturing, distribution, use, and end-of-life disposal. Crucially, the criteria must be based on scientific evidence and quantifiable data, ensuring that the environmental improvements claimed are substantial and verifiable. The standard emphasizes transparency and stakeholder consultation, meaning that relevant parties, including industry, government, consumers, and environmental organizations, should have opportunities to provide input. This collaborative approach helps to build consensus and credibility for the chosen criteria. The criteria themselves must be product group specific, meaning they are tailored to the particular category of goods or services being evaluated, and they must address significant environmental issues relevant to that group. Furthermore, the criteria must be dynamic, allowing for periodic review and revision to reflect advancements in technology, scientific understanding, and evolving environmental priorities. This ensures the continued relevance and effectiveness of the labeling program. The process also involves establishing clear procedures for verification and certification, by a competent, independent third party, ensuring that products claiming the label actually meet the established criteria. This systematic approach, grounded in scientific rigor and stakeholder engagement, is fundamental to the integrity of Type I environmental labeling. Question 7. When developing environmental criteria for a new product category under a Type I environmental labeling scheme compliant with ISO 14024, 1999, a critical initial step involves identifying significant environmental aspects across the product's life cycle. Which of the following approaches best reflects the principles of ISO 14024, 1999 for this identification process, considering the need for a holistic life cycle perspective and the focus on verifiable environmental performance improvements? Option A. Conducting a comprehensive life cycle assessment, LCA, to identify all potential environmental impacts, then selecting criteria based on the most scientifically robust data available for each impact category, irrespective of their significance within the product's overall environmental footprint. Option B. Systematically evaluating environmental impacts across the entire product life cycle, from raw material extraction to end of life, using a combination of quantitative data and expert judgment to determine the most significant aspects that can be influenced by product design and use. Option C. Prioritizing environmental aspects that are most easily measured and verified, even if they represent minor impacts, to expedite the labeling process. Option D. Focusing exclusively on the manufacturing phase's environmental impacts, as this is typically the most controllable stage by the producer, and disregarding downstream or upstream impacts. The correct answer is C. Prioritizing environmental aspects that are most easily measured and verified, even if they represent minor impacts, to expedite the labeling process. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, concerning Type I environmental labeling, mandates that the selection of product groups and the development of criteria for these groups be based on a life cycle perspective. This means that significant environmental aspects across the entire life cycle of a product or service are considered, from raw material extraction through manufacturing, distribution, use, and end-of-life disposal or recycling. The standard emphasizes that the criteria should focus on those environmental impacts that are most significant, and that can be influenced by the product's design and production. When applying life cycle assessment, LCA, principles to identify these significant environmental aspects for Type I labeling, the process involves several key stages. Initially, a broad inventory of potential environmental impacts is compiled. Subsequently, these impacts are evaluated to determine their relative significance. This evaluation often involves quantitative data where available, but also qualitative assessments based on scientific consensus and regulatory priorities. The focus is on identifying aspects that represent the greatest potential for environmental improvement and are relevant to the product category. For instance, a product with high energy consumption during its use phase would warrant significant attention to its energy efficiency, as this is a major environmental aspect. Similarly, products with significant waste generation at end of life would require criteria addressing recyclability or biodegradability. The standard encourages the use of established LCA methodologies, such as those outlined in ISO 14040 series, to ensure a systematic and transparent approach. The ultimate goal is to establish environmental criteria that are scientifically sound, relevant to the product's life cycle, and verifiable, thereby enabling consumers to make informed choices about environmentally preferable products. The selection of criteria is not arbitrary, but is driven by the identification of the most impactful environmental issues associated with the product category throughout its existence. Question 8. When a consumer group raises concerns about the environmental performance claims associated with a product certified under a Type I environmental labeling program, and these concerns are formally submitted to the program operator, what is the fundamental procedural requirement stipulated by ISO 14024, 1999, for addressing such a complaint? Option A. The program operator must initiate an impartial and timely investigation into the substance of the complaint, reviewing the product's adherence to the established environmental criteria and the certification process. Option B. The program operator should immediately withdraw the environmental label from the product until a comprehensive third-party audit can be completed. Option C. The program operator must publish the complaint and the product's certification details on a public registry for all stakeholders to review and comment. Option D. The program operator is required to engage in direct negotiation with the consumer group to reach a mutually agreeable resolution without external review. The correct answer is A. The program operator must initiate an impartial and timely investigation into the substance of the complaint, reviewing the product's adherence to the established environmental criteria and the certification process. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, specifically in its provisions for Type I environmental labeling, mandates a robust framework for addressing complaints and disputes that may arise concerning the validity or application of the label. The standard emphasizes transparency and fairness in the certification and verification process. When a complaint is lodged by a stakeholder, such as a consumer, competitor, or regulatory body, regarding a product bearing a Type I label, the program operator is obligated to follow established procedures. These procedures are designed to investigate the complaint thoroughly, impartially, and in a timely manner. The core principle is to ensure that the environmental claims substantiated by the label remain accurate and that the integrity of the Type I labeling system is upheld. This involves reviewing the product's compliance with the established environmental criteria, the certification process undertaken, and any potential misrepresentation. The resolution of such disputes typically involves a multi-stage approach, which may include an initial review, an investigation by an independent panel or ombudsman, and potentially a formal arbitration or appeal process if an agreement cannot be reached. The ultimate goal is to maintain consumer confidence and the credibility of the environmental labeling scheme by demonstrating a commitment to accountability and effective dispute resolution mechanisms. The standard does not prescribe specific legal remedies or financial penalties, but focuses on the procedural fairness and the corrective actions that might be necessary to rectify any identified noncompliance or misrepresentation, thereby reinforcing the system's reliability and adherence to its stated principles. Question 9. When developing the criteria for a new Type I environmental label for a line of portable audio devices, what fundamental principle, as outlined in ISO 14024, 1999, must guide the selection of environmental performance indicators across the product's life cycle stages, from raw material acquisition to disposal, to ensure the label's validity and consumer trust, particularly in light of evolving environmental regulations such as those concerning battery disposal and energy efficiency standards? Option A. Criteria should primarily focus on the most visible or easily communicated environmental benefits during the product use phase, as this has the greatest consumer impact. Option B. Criteria should be established based on the subjective perception of environmental friendliness by a small focus group of consumers to maximize market appeal. Option C. Criteria must be based on a scientifically sound, holistic assessment of significant environmental aspects throughout the product's life cycle, considering both current and anticipated regulatory frameworks. Option D. The selection of environmental criteria should be driven by the lowest cost of compliance for manufacturers, ensuring broad market adoption of the label. The correct answer is C. Criteria must be based on a scientifically sound, holistic assessment of significant environmental aspects throughout the product's life cycle, considering both current and anticipated regulatory frameworks. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, specifically concerning Type I environmental labeling, mandates that the selection of environmental criteria and the verification procedures must be based on a comprehensive assessment of significant environmental aspects across the entire product life cycle. This includes raw material extraction, manufacturing, distribution, product use, and end-of-life management. The standard emphasizes that these criteria should be quantifiable, verifiable, and relevant to the product category. When establishing criteria for a new Type I label, an organization must consider the potential for environmental improvement at each stage. For instance, if the use phase of an electronic device is identified as having a significant impact, criteria might focus on energy efficiency. Conversely, if raw material extraction for a textile product is a major concern, criteria could address sustainable sourcing or reduced use of harmful chemicals in processing. The process requires rigorous scientific and technical justification, often involving life cycle assessment, LCA, principles, though not necessarily a full LCA for every single criterion. The goal is to ensure that the label genuinely reflects a reduced environmental impact compared to comparable products, without creating undue trade barriers or misleading consumers. The selection of criteria should also consider national and international regulations and standards relevant to the product and its life cycle stages. For example, regulations on hazardous substances, like RoHS directives, or waste management, like WE directives, would inform the criteria selection for relevant product categories. The verification process must also be robust, ensuring that manufacturers can demonstrate compliance with the established criteria throughout the product's life cycle. This often involves third-party certification to maintain the credibility of the Type I label. Question 10. Consider a scenario where a Type I environmental labeling program, designed in accordance with ISO 14024/1999 principles, is certifying a new line of cleaning products. The program has established criteria for reduced volatile organic compound, VOC, content and biodegradability of ingredients. To effectively communicate these environmental attributes to the average consumer, which approach would best align with the standard's emphasis on clear and accessible information? Option A. Utilizing a simple, universally recognized icon on the product packaging that visually represents eco-friendly, and a brief, easily understandable phrase such as "better for the environment" without further elaboration. Option B. Displaying a numerical score out of 100 on the label, representing an aggregated environmental performance metric derived from a complex weighted formula, with no accompanying explanation of the scoring system or the factors contributing to the score. Option C. Including a QR code on the packaging that links to a comprehensive website detailing all the scientific methodologies, specific VOC thresholds met, and a comparative analysis against industry averages, with the expectation that consumers will scan and navigate this information. Option D. Providing a detailed technical report on the chemical composition and biodegradability studies alongside the product, assuming consumers will seek out and interpret this complex data. The correct answer is D. Providing a detailed technical report on the chemical composition and biodegradability studies alongside the product, assuming consumers will seek out and interpret this complex data. Explanation: ISO 14024/1999, specifically within its principles for Type I environmental labeling, mandates that the information provided to consumers must be clear, accessible, and understandable. This ensures that the environmental claims made by the label are meaningful and can be readily comprehended by the target audience, facilitating informed purchasing decisions. The standard emphasizes that the criteria for product selection and the environmental benefits communicated should be transparent and verifiable. This transparency is crucial for building consumer trust and ensuring the integrity of the labeling program. When a product undergoes certification for a Type I label, the program operator is responsible for ensuring that the communication materials, including the label itself and any accompanying documentation or marketing, present the environmental information in a way that is not misleading and is easily digestible by the average consumer. This might involve using universally understood symbols, concise language, and avoiding technical jargon where possible, or providing clear definitions for any necessary technical terms. The focus is on enabling consumers to differentiate between products based on their environmental performance as verified by the Type I label, thereby promoting environmentally preferable purchasing. This principle is foundational to the effectiveness and credibility of Type I environmental labeling schemes, aligning with broader consumer protection goals and the promotion of sustainable consumption patterns. The standard does not prescribe specific calculation methods for environmental benefits, but rather the clear communication of those benefits once determined through the life cycle assessment or other relevant evaluation methods. The clarity of information is paramount for the label's purpose. Question 11. When establishing the environmental criteria for a new product group under the ISO 14024/1999 Type I environmental labeling scheme, what is the foundational principle guiding the selection of relevant environmental impact categories for assessment? Option A. Focusing exclusively on impacts occurring during the product's use phase, as this is where consumer interaction is highest. Option B. Identifying and characterizing the most significant environmental impacts across the product's entire life cycle, ensuring scientific validity and relevance to the specific product group. Option C. Selecting impact categories based on current regulatory requirements in major consumer markets, regardless of their life cycle significance. Option D. Prioritizing impacts that are most readily quantifiable with readily available data, even if they are not the most significant environmental burdens. Correct answer is D. Prioritizing impacts that are most readily quantifiable with readily available data, even if they are not the most significant environmental burdens. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, specifically concerning Type I environmental labeling, mandates that the selection of environmental impact categories for product group criteria must be based on a comprehensive life cycle perspective. This involves identifying and characterizing the most significant environmental impacts associated with a product throughout its entire existence, from raw material extraction, manufacturing, distribution, use, and finally to its end-of-life disposal or recycling. The standard emphasizes that these impact categories should be relevant to the specific product group and scientifically sound, reflecting actual environmental performance rather than perceived issues. For instance, a beverage container's criteria might focus on energy consumption during production and recyclability, while a cleaning product's criteria could prioritize biodegradability of ingredients and reduced volatile organic compound (VOC) emissions. The principle is to ensure that the chosen criteria effectively differentiate environmentally preferable products within a given category, and that the environmental benefits claimed are verifiable and meaningful. This systematic approach, often informed by life cycle assessment (LCA) principles, ensures the credibility and environmental integrity of the Type I label, aligning with the standard's goal of promoting environmentally conscious consumption. The selection process is not arbitrary. It requires a rigorous methodology to pinpoint the most pertinent environmental aspects. Question 12. When establishing a Type I environmental labeling program under ISO 14024, 1999 for new category of portable electronic devices, what is the most critical initial step in defining the scope of environmental impacts to be evaluated, ensuring the label's credibility and market relevance? Option A. Focusing solely on impacts directly attributable to the manufacturing phase, as this is typically where the most significant resource consumption occurs for electronic goods. Option B. Prioritizing impacts that are easily measurable and have readily available data, even if they are not the most significant environmental concerns for portable electronics. Option C. Conducting a comprehensive life cycle assessment, LCA, to identify all potential environmental burdens, followed by a prioritization of significant impacts based on scientific evidence and market research for the specific product category. Option D. Relying on existing general environmental regulations for consumer electronics to dictate the scope of impacts, without specific analysis for the new product category. The correct answer is C. Conducting a comprehensive life cycle assessment, LCA, to identify all potential environmental burdens, followed by a prioritization of significant impacts based on scientific evidence and market research for the specific product category. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, in its principles and procedures for Type I environmental labeling, mandates a rigorous approach to defining target product categories and the environmental impacts to be assessed. The standard emphasizes that the selection of product categories should be based on market relevance, potential for environmental improvement, and the availability of reliable data for assessment. Crucially, the environmental impacts considered must be significant across the product's life cycle, from raw material extraction to end-of-life disposal. This involves a comprehensive life cycle assessment, LCA perspective, although the standard allows for a focus on key impacts where a full LCA is not feasible or necessary for the specific product category. The process involves identifying impacts such as resource depletion, energy consumption, emissions to air, water, and soil, and waste generation. The chosen impacts must be measurable and verifiable, forming the basis for the development of specific environmental performance criteria. The objective is to ensure that the label signifies genuine environmental benefits and provides clear, credible information to consumers. The development of these criteria is a multi-stakeholder process, often involving industry, government, and environmental organizations, to ensure broad acceptance and effectiveness. The standard also requires that the criteria are periodically reviewed and updated to reflect technological advancements and evolving environmental priorities, ensuring the continued relevance and integrity of the Type I label. Question 13. A manufacturer of biodegradable cleaning agents seeks Type I environmental labeling under a program aligned with ISO 14024, 1999 principles. The program's criteria specify that the primary surfactant must degrade by at least 90% within 28 days in a standard OECD 301B test. The manufacturer submits documentation detailing their surfactant's composition and results from an internal laboratory study indicating 95% biodegradation. Which aspect of the ISO 14024, 1999 verification process is most critical to ensure the validity of the manufacturer's claim, given the potential for bias in self-generated data? Option A. Independent third-party verification of the biodegradation test results by a competent certification body. Option B. Public disclosure of the full chemical composition of the cleaning agent, including all additives. Option C. A comparative life cycle assessment of the product against conventional cleaning agents. Option D. Consumer surveys to gauge the perceived environmental friendliness of the product packaging. The correct answer is A. Independent third-party verification of the biodegradation test results by a competent certification body. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, specifically concerning Type I environmental labeling, mandates a robust verification and certification process. This standard emphasizes that the environmental claims made on the label must be substantiated by objective criteria and verified by a competent third-party body. The principle is to ensure that the environmental benefits claimed are real, measurable, and communicated transparently to consumers. The verification process under ISO 14024 involves the assessment of product development, manufacturing, distribution, use, and disposal phases against predefined environmental criteria established by the program. This assessment includes reviewing documentation, conducting audits, and potentially product testing. The certification body plays a crucial role in independently confirming that the product or service meets these criteria. This third-party verification is a cornerstone of Type I labeling, distinguishing it from self-declared environmental claims. The integrity of the certification process is paramount to building consumer trust and ensuring the effectiveness of environmental labeling as a tool for promoting environmentally preferable products. Failure to adhere to rigorous verification procedures can undermine the credibility of the entire Type I labeling scheme and mislead consumers regarding the environmental performance of products. The standard requires that the certification body be independent, impartial, and competent in the relevant product category and environmental aspects. Question 14. When establishing the environmental criteria for a new Type I environmental label under ISO 14024 for a line of biodegradable cleaning agents, what is the most crucial foundational step for accurately quantifying the energy, water, and material flows associated with their production and use phase, ensuring the label's credibility and adherence to the standard's principles? Option A. Conducting extensive consumer surveys to determine which environmental attributes are most appealing to the target market for biodegradable cleaning agents. Option B. Engaging in direct negotiations with raw material suppliers to secure the lowest possible cost for all inputs, thereby influencing the material flow quantification. Option C. Relying solely on the manufacturer's internal environmental management system, EMS, data without external verification for all flow quantifications. Option D. Developing a comprehensive product category rule, PCR, that specifies the life cycle stages to be assessed, the functional unit, and the specific metrics and methodologies for quantifying energy, water, and material inputs and outputs. The correct answer is D. Developing a comprehensive product category rule, PCR, that specifies the life cycle stages to be assessed, the functional unit, and the specific metrics and methodologies for quantifying energy, water, and material inputs and outputs. Explanation: the core principle of ISO 14024 Type I environmental labeling is to provide a verifiable and credible environmental claim based on a life cycle perspective. For quantifying energy, water, and material flows, the standard emphasizes the selection of criteria that are relevant, measurable, and representative of significant environmental impacts throughout the product's life cycle. The selection of a product category rule, PCR, is paramount. A PCR defines the specific environmental criteria and the methodology for assessing them for a particular product group. When quantifying flows, the PCR must dictate which life cycle stages are included, e.g., raw material extraction, manufacturing, use, end of life, and the specific metrics to be used. For instance, energy flow might be quantified in megajoules (mJ) per functional unit, water flow in liters per functional unit, and material flow in kilograms per functional unit. The criteria must be scientifically sound, and the data used for quantification must be reliable and verifiable. This ensures that the environmental performance being assessed is indeed significant, and that the resulting label accurately reflects the product's relative environmental benefits. The process involves setting thresholds or benchmarks against which a product's performance is measured, often in comparison to other products within the same category. The emphasis is on relative environmental improvement, meaning the product performs better than others in its class according to the established criteria. The quantification must be transparent and auditable by a third party. Question 15. Considering the principles outlined in ISO 14024, 1999, for Type I environmental labeling, which of the following approaches most effectively addresses the ongoing challenge of monitoring the program's success in driving demonstrable environmental improvement and influencing market shifts towards more sustainable consumption patterns? Option A. Implementing a system where the environmental criteria are fixed indefinitely upon initial certification, with no mechanism for reevaluation or adaptation to new scientific findings or technological advancements in environmental performance. Option B. Conducting infrequent, broad consumer surveys that focus primarily on the aesthetic appeal of the label, without correlating these findings to actual purchasing behavior or environmental impact metrics. Option C. Establishing a comprehensive system for periodic review of product group criteria and performance data, coupled with market research to gauge consumer awareness and purchasing intent related to the label, and tracking the aggregate environmental performance improvements of labeled products against baseline data. Option D. Relying solely on manufacturers' self-reported data regarding the environmental performance of their labeled products, assuming that market competition will naturally incentivize genuine environmental progress. The correct answer is C. Establishing a comprehensive system for periodic review of product group criteria and performance data, coupled with market research to gauge consumer awareness and purchasing intent related to the label, and tracking the aggregate environmental performance improvements of labeled products against baseline data. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, specifically in its principles and procedures for Type I environmental labeling, emphasizes the need for ongoing verification and review to ensure the program's integrity and its contribution to environmental improvement. This standard mandates that the criteria for product groups and the environmental benefits claimed by the label must be periodically reviewed and updated. This review process is crucial for maintaining the credibility of the label and ensuring it continues to reflect the most significant environmental impacts and advancements. The standard also requires that the effectiveness of the labeling program itself be monitored. This monitoring should assess whether the label is indeed influencing consumer purchasing decisions towards more environmentally preferable products, and whether the overall environmental performance of labeled products is improving over time. This involves tracking market penetration of labeled products, consumer awareness and perception of the label, and critically, the environmental performance data of the labeled products compared to their non-labeled counterparts or earlier versions. The objective is to demonstrate that the labeling scheme is driving tangible environmental progress, not just serving as a marketing tool. Therefore, a robust monitoring mechanism that quantifies environmental improvements and assesses market impact is a cornerstone of a successful Type I labeling program. Question 16. A national environmental labeling program, established under the principles of ISO 14024, 1999, for Type I environmental labeling, is considering the introduction of a new product category for biodegradable cleaning agents to foster broad stakeholder comprehension and acceptance of the program's integrity. What is the most effective approach for the program owner to communicate the rationale behind the specific environmental criteria and the verification methodologies for this new category? Option A. Publishing a comprehensive technical document detailing the life cycle assessment methodology, environmental impact categories considered, and the third-party verification protocols, alongside a public consultation period for feedback before finalization. Option B. Presenting the information at a single, invitation-only industry workshop, assuming that the industry will then disseminate the information to other stakeholders. Option C. Relying solely on the product manufacturers to educate their consumers about the label's meaning through their own marketing materials, as they are the primary point of contact. Option D. Issuing a brief press release announcing the new product category and its general environmental benefits, with a link to a more detailed, but password-protected, internal report for auditors. The correct answer is A. Publishing a comprehensive technical document detailing the life cycle assessment methodology, environmental impact categories considered, and the third-party verification protocols, alongside a public consultation period for feedback before finalization. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, specifically addressing Type I environmental labeling, emphasizes a holistic approach to environmental product declarations. A core principle is ensuring that the criteria for product selection and the verification procedures are transparent and accessible to all stakeholders. This transparency is crucial for building trust and promoting understanding of the label's significance. When a program owner develops new product categories or revises existing criteria, they must engage with relevant stakeholders, including industry representatives, environmental organizations, consumer groups, and government bodies. This engagement is not merely a formality. It is a process to gather input, address concerns, and ensure that the environmental improvements claimed by the label are scientifically sound, technically feasible, and relevant to consumer choices. The standard mandates that the program owner clearly communicate the rationale behind the chosen environmental criteria, the methodologies used for life cycle assessment, if applicable to criterion development, and the verification processes. This communication should be readily available through various channels, such as public reports, websites, and educational materials. The goal is to empower consumers and other stakeholders to make informed decisions based on a clear understanding of what the Type I label represents and the rigorous process it undergoes. Without this proactive and continuous communication strategy, the credibility and effectiveness of the environmental labeling program can be undermined, leading to skepticism and reduced market impact. The standard's focus on stakeholder involvement and clear communication directly supports the principle of promoting understanding by making the program's underpinnings accessible and comprehensible. Question 17. Consider a scenario where a national environmental labeling program, adhering to ISO 14024, 1999 principles, is developing new criteria for biodegradable household cleaning agents. The program's steering committee, composed of industry representatives, environmental NGOs, and consumer advocacy groups, faces a challenge in agreeing on the specific biodegradability testing standards. One faction advocates for a rapid, laboratory-based simulation that may not fully reflect real-world conditions, while another group insists on a more time-consuming but ecologically representative field study. To uphold the standard's requirement for a transparent and consensus-based approach, what is the most appropriate course of action for the steering committee? Option A. Commission independent research to definitively prove the superiority of one testing method over the other, and then implement the winning method without further stakeholder input. Option B. Conduct a series of public consultations and expert workshops to collaboratively define scientifically valid and practically applicable biodegradability testing protocols that balance scientific rigor with real-world relevance, ensuring all data and deliberations are publicly accessible. Option C. Adopt the testing standard that is currently the most widely used internationally, regardless of its specific applicability to the unique environmental conditions of the region. Option D. Prioritize the testing methodology favored by the majority of the steering committee members, as this reflects a democratic consensus. The correct answer is B. Conduct a series of public consultations and expert workshops to collaboratively define scientifically valid and practically applicable biodegradability testing protocols that balance scientific rigor with real-world relevance, ensuring all data and deliberations are publicly accessible. Explanation: the core principle of a transparent and consensus-based approach in Type I environmental labeling, as outlined by ISO 14024, 1999, mandates that the development of environmental product criteria and the selection of product categories be undertaken through a process that actively involves all relevant stakeholders. This includes manufacturers, consumers, government agencies, environmental organizations, and scientific experts. The objective is to ensure that the criteria are scientifically sound, technically feasible, and reflect a broad societal consensus on environmental priorities. A crucial aspect of this is the open availability of all documentation related to the development and revision of these criteria, allowing for public scrutiny and input. This transparency fosters trust and credibility in the labeling scheme. Furthermore, the process must be auditable, allowing independent verification that the established procedures have been followed. The standard emphasizes that such a process, when implemented effectively, leads to the development of robust and widely accepted environmental labels that genuinely guide consumers towards more environmentally preferable products without creating undue trade barriers or imposing arbitrary requirements. The establishment of a clear appeals process for decisions made within the labeling program also contributes to the overall fairness and transparency of the system. Question 18. A product certification body is developing environmental criteria for a new Type I environmental label for biodegradable cleaning agents, adhering to the principles of ISO 14024, 1999, are deciding between using the CML baseline method or the RE-SciP midpoint ECEC method for assessing the ecotoxicity and human toxicity impacts of the product's ingredients and manufacturing processes. Which of the following considerations is most critical for the certification body to ensure compliance with ISO 14024, 1999, requirements for scientific validity and transparency in this selection? Option A. The direct inclusion of the chosen method's specific impact categories within existing national environmental regulations for consumer goods, even if those regulations predate current LCA best practices. Option B. The chosen method's ability to provide clear, quantifiable characterization factors for relevant ecotoxicity and human toxicity endpoints that can be directly linked to the product's life cycle stages and communicated to consumers. Option C. The widespread adoption of the chosen method by competitors in the cleaning product sector, irrespective of its specific applicability to biodegradable formulations. Option D. The availability of the chosen method's software implementation, prioritizing ease of use for LCA practitioners over the specific scientific robustness of its impact assessment models. The correct answer is B. The chosen method's ability to provide clear, quantifiable characterization factors for relevant ecotoxicity and human toxicity endpoints that can be directly linked to the product's life cycle stages and communicated to consumers. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, concerning Type I environmental labeling, mandates that the selection of environmental criteria and the methodologies used for their assessment must be transparent, scientifically sound, and based on a life cycle perspective. When evaluating the environmental performance of products for Type I labeling, the selection of an appropriate impact assessment method is crucial. Methods like CML, Centrum voor Milieukunde, and RE-SciP recipe for the recipe-based environmental impact assessment are commonly employed in life cycle assessment, LCA, to quantify environmental impacts. CML, for instance, often utilizes a midpoint approach, focusing on specific environmental problems like acidification or eutrophication, and provides characterization factors for these midpoints. RE-SciP, on the other hand, offers a more comprehensive framework, allowing for both midpoint and endpoint assessments, and can be applied at various levels of detail, e.g., hierarchical approach. The standard requires that the chosen methodology be clearly defined and justified, ensuring that the environmental benefits claimed by the label are substantiated by robust scientific data. This involves a thorough understanding of the scope, system boundaries, data quality requirements, and the specific impact categories addressed by the chosen method, aligning with the principle of ensuring that the environmental criteria are relevant and verifiable throughout the product's life cycle. The choice of method should also consider its applicability to the specific product category and its alignment with relevant national or international regulations or standards that might influence environmental performance assessment for labeling purposes. Question 19. Consider a multi-stakeholder committee tasked with establishing environmental performance criteria for new type I environmental labeling program for household cleaning agents, adhering to ISO 14024, 1999 principles. The committee is debating the inclusion of criteria related to the biodegradability of surfactants. One faction proposes a criterion requiring complete aerobic biodegradation within 28 days, citing widespread scientific consensus on this benchmark. Another faction advocates for a criterion focusing on inherent biodegradability, arguing that complete biodegradation is not always achievable or relevant for all surfactant types used in cleaning products, and that demonstrating inherent biodegradability, coupled with low aquatic toxicity, offers a more practical yet environmentally sound approach for a broad product category, which approach best aligns with the ISO 14024, 1999 requirement for setting measurable and verifiable environmental performance criteria that are relevant and achievable for a diverse product group. Option A. Establishing criteria based on the concentration of volatile organic compounds, VOC, released during product use, as this is a direct measure of indoor air quality impact, which is a primary consumer concern for cleaning agents. Option B. Mandating complete aerobic biodegradation within 28 days for all surfactants, as this represents the most universally accepted and measurable benchmark for environmental friendliness, regardless of specific surfactant chemistry or application. Option C. Focusing solely on the percentage of bio-based content in surfactants, as this directly addresses the renewability aspect and is easily measurable, aligning with broader sustainability goals. Option D. Prioritizing inherent biodegradability with stringent aquatic toxicity limits, as it allows for a broader range of technically feasible and environmentally sound surfactant options within the product category, while still ensuring a measurable and verifiable environmental benefit. The correct answer is D. Prioritizing inherent biodegradability with stringent aquatic toxicity limits, as it allows for a broader range of technically feasible and environmentally sound surfactant options within the product category, while still ensuring a measurable and verifiable environmental benefit. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, specifically concerning Type I environmental labeling, mandates that the environmental performance criteria used for product groups must be measurable, verifiable, and relevant to the product's life cycle. The standard emphasizes that these criteria should be developed through a transparent process involving relevant stakeholders, including industry, government, and consumer groups. When establishing these criteria, the program operator must ensure they are sufficiently stringent to differentiate environmentally preferable products within a product category, yet achievable by a reasonable number of manufacturers. The criteria should also be reviewed and updated periodically to reflect advancements in environmental technology and evolving scientific understanding. This process is crucial for maintaining the credibility and effectiveness of the Type I label as a reliable indicator of environmental preference. The development of such criteria is not a static process, but an iterative one, requiring ongoing assessment of market dynamics and technological progress to ensure the label remains a meaningful guide for consumers and a driver for improved environmental performance across industries. The core principle is to set benchmarks that encourage continuous improvement in environmental impact reduction. Question 20. When establishing a Type I environmental labeling program in accordance with ISO 14024, 1999, what constitutes the most comprehensive and legally defensible approach to stakeholder engagement in the development and ongoing management of the program's environmental criteria and verification procedures? Option A. Primarily consulting with industry associations and academic researchers to define environmental criteria, with consumers and government agencies informed post-establishment. Option B. Allowing manufacturers to self-certify their products based on internal environmental assessments, with limited oversight from consumer groups. Option C. Actively involving manufacturers, consumers, environmental organizations, and relevant government regulatory bodies in the program's steering committee and technical working groups. Option D. Engaging only government agencies and international standards bodies to set all criteria, with minimal direct input from manufacturers or public interest groups. The correct answer is C. Actively involving manufacturers, consumers, environmental organizations, and relevant government regulatory bodies in the program's steering committee and technical working groups. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 14024 regarding Type I environmental labeling is the establishment of a robust and transparent program that considers the perspectives of all parties involved in the product's life cycle and its environmental impact. This standard mandates that the development and operation of such programs must engage a diverse range of stakeholders to ensure credibility, fairness, and broad acceptance. Manufacturers are essential as they produce the goods and have direct knowledge of their environmental attributes. Consumers are critical because they are the end users and their purchasing decisions are influenced by labeling. Environmental advocacy groups provide expertise on ecological concerns and can champion the program's environmental integrity. Government agencies play a vital role in setting regulatory frameworks, ensuring compliance, and promoting public trust in environmental claims. Therefore, a comprehensive approach that actively involves these groups in defining the criteria, auditing processes, and overall program management is fundamental to a successful Type I labeling scheme. This collaborative process helps to avoid biased criteria, ensures that the labeling addresses significant environmental impacts, and builds confidence among all participants. The standard emphasizes that the program should be open to participation from all interested parties, fostering a balanced and equitable system. Question 21. Consider a biorefinery that processes biomass to produce both a primary biofuel and a valuable organic fertilizer as a co-product. The process requires significant energy input and raw material. According to the principles of ISO 14024, 1999, for Type I environmental labeling, which of the following allocation approaches would be most consistent with ensuring a scientifically defensible and transparent distribution of environmental burdens for the biofuel, especially when the economic value of the fertilizer can fluctuate significantly? Option A. Allocate all environmental burdens to the primary biofuel and consider the fertilizer co-product as having zero environmental impact. Option B. Allocate environmental burdens based on the mass or energy content of the biofuel and the fertilizer co-product. Option C. Allocate environmental burdens based on a predefined fixed percentage that is not directly tied to the process outputs or their value. Option D. Allocate environmental burdens based solely on the current market price of the biofuel and the fertilizer co-product. Correct answer is B. Allocate environmental burdens based on the mass or energy content of the biofuel and the fertilizer co-product. Explanation. The establishment of allocation rules for multifunctional processes within the framework of ISO 14024, 1999 Type I environmental labeling is crucial for accurately assigning environmental burdens to specific product functions. A multifunctional process is one that yields more than one output, where at least one of these outputs is not the primary product being assessed. For instance, a manufacturing process might produce a main product and a co-product or byproduct. ISO 14024 emphasizes that the selection of allocation methods should be transparent, scientifically sound, and justifiable. The standard does not prescribe a single universal method, but rather outlines principles for selecting and applying them. Common allocation approaches include allocation based on physical relationships, e.g., mass, energy content, allocation based on economic value, e.g., market value of co-products, or allocation based on system expansion, avoiding allocation by modeling the co-product as a separate system. When considering the rigorous requirements of Type I labeling, which aims for credible and verifiable environmental claims, the most appropriate allocation approach for a multifunctional process involves a method that reflects the actual environmental burden associated with each function, while also being consistent with the overall life cycle assessment, LCA, methodology, and the specific product category rules, PCR, that govern the Type I program. Allocation based on the physical relationship, particularly mass or energy, is often preferred when a clear and direct link between the inputs and outputs can be established and quantified, as it avoids subjective economic valuations that can fluctuate. This approach ensures that the environmental impacts are distributed proportionally to the material or energy flows associated with each function. The principle is to ensure that the environmental burdens are distributed in a way that is scientifically defensible and does not distort the environmental profile of the primary product being certified. This aligns with the goal of Type I labeling to provide consumers with reliable information about the environmental performance of products. Question 22. A consortium of manufacturers in the home appliance sector is developing a Type I environmental labeling program for washing machines. They are seeking to define the core principles for selecting product categories and establishing the environmental criteria that will differentiate certified products. Considering the foundational requirements of ISO 14024, 1999, which of the following approaches best ensures the program's credibility and adherence to the standard's intent regarding transparency and scientific basis for criteria development? Option A. Relying on a single, dominant market player's existing environmental performance data and criteria as the primary basis for the new labeling program, with minor adjustments based on feedback from a small group of key suppliers. Option B. Developing a set of criteria derived from a comparative analysis of existing voluntary eco-labels in the appliance sector, with minimal public consultation, to expedite the certification process. Option C. Establishing a technical committee composed solely of senior engineers from participating manufacturing companies to define all product categories and environmental performance benchmarks based on internal R&D data. Option D. Initiating a transparent, multi-stakeholder consultation process involving industry representatives, government environmental agencies, consumer advocacy groups, and independent scientific experts to identify significant environmental impacts and set scientifically defensible, life cycle-based performance criteria. The correct answer is C. Establishing a technical committee composed solely of senior engineers from participating manufacturing companies to define all product categories and environmental performance benchmarks based on internal R&D data. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 14024, 1999 Type I environmental labeling is the establishment of a comprehensive environmental management system for the product or service throughout its life cycle. This standard mandates that the selection of product categories and the development of specific environmental criteria for these categories must be conducted through a transparent, multi-stakeholder process. This process involves input from industry, government, consumer groups, and environmental organizations. The criteria themselves must be based on scientific evidence, represent significant environmental improvements, and be relevant to the product's life cycle. Furthermore, the certification process must be carried out by a competent, independent third party. This ensures impartiality and credibility. The standard also emphasizes the importance of continuous review and updating of the criteria to reflect technological advancements and evolving environmental concerns, aligning with principles found in broader environmental policy frameworks such as the EU's Eco-Design Directive, which aims to improve the environmental performance of products throughout their life cycle. The integrity of a Type I label relies heavily on the rigor and openness of the program's development and ongoing management, ensuring that the label signifies genuine environmental benefits and does not mislead consumers. Question 23. Consider a national environmental agency developing a Type I environmental labeling program for household cleaning products, adhering to the principles of ISO 14024. Which of the following actions most accurately reflects the foundational requirements for establishing the environmental criteria for this product category? Option A. Prioritizing criteria that favor domestically produced cleaning agents, even if this means overlooking potential environmental improvements achievable with imported alternatives, to stimulate local industry. Option B. Commissioning a comprehensive life cycle assessment for a representative sample of cleaning products, followed by a public consultation period on draft criteria developed from the LCA findings, ensuring criteria are scientifically sound and address significant environmental aspects. Option C. Relying on existing international standards for eco-labels without adaptation, assuming they are universally applicable and sufficient for the national market's specific environmental concerns. Option D. Engaging in a consultative process with manufacturers to identify the least impactful products currently on the market and basing criteria solely on their performance metrics. The correct answer is D. Engaging in a consultative process with manufacturers to identify the least impactful products currently on the market and basing criteria solely on their performance metrics. Explanation. The core principle of Type I environmental labeling, as defined by ISO 14024, is the establishment of a voluntary, third-party verified system that promotes products with a reduced environmental impact throughout their life cycle. This is achieved by setting clear, objective, and scientifically substantiated criteria for product categories. These criteria must be developed through a transparent and participatory process involving relevant stakeholders, including industry, government, and consumer groups. The standard emphasizes that the selection of product categories and the development of criteria should be based on their potential to reduce environmental impact. Furthermore, Type I labeling requires that the environmental claims made are verified by an independent third party, ensuring credibility and preventing greenwashing. This verification process often involves assessing the product against predefined standards and ensuring compliance with the established environmental criteria. The ultimate goal is to provide consumers with reliable information to make environmentally preferable purchasing decisions. The process of developing and updating these criteria must be open to public comment and review, reflecting a commitment to transparency and continuous improvement in environmental performance. The standard also mandates that the criteria should not create unnecessary trade barriers and should be applied consistently across all products within a category. Question 24. When developing environmental criteria for a new Type I eco-label for portable electronic devices, what fundamental consideration is paramount for establishing the system boundaries and defining the functional unit to ensure the label's credibility and comparability according to ISO 14024, 1999 principles? Option A. Defining a functional unit solely based on the product's physical dimensions to facilitate easy comparison across different product categories. Option B. Limiting system boundaries to only the manufacturing and disposal phases to simplify the assessment and reduce data collection requirements for manufacturers. Option C. Prioritizing the inclusion of all potential environmental impacts, regardless of their significance, within system boundaries to create a comprehensive, albeit complex, assessment. Option D. Ensuring the functional unit accurately reflects the service provided by the product throughout its intended use phase, and that system boundaries encompass all significant environmental impacts across the product's life cycle relevant to that service. The correct answer is D. Ensuring the functional unit accurately reflects the service provided by the product throughout its intended use phase, and that system boundaries encompass all significant environmental impacts across the product's life cycle relevant to that service. Explanation. The core principle of establishing system boundaries and a functional unit in Type I environmental labeling under ISO 14024 is to ensure comparability and relevance. The functional unit defines the performance of the product system for use, serving as the reference for the environmental impacts being assessed. System boundaries dictate which life cycle stages and processes are included in the assessment. For a Type I label, the criteria for setting these boundaries and defining the functional unit are driven by the need to identify significant environmental improvements across the product's entire life cycle, or at least a substantial portion of it, in a way that is relevant to the consumer and allows for meaningful comparison with similar products. This involves considering all relevant environmental impacts and ensuring that the functional unit adequately represents the service delivered by the product. The criteria development process, as outlined in ISO 14024, mandates that these elements are clearly defined and justified to prevent ambiguity and ensure the integrity of the environmental claims made through the label. The objective is to provide a clear, verifiable, and meaningful basis for environmental performance assessment. Question 25. Consider a scenario where a new Type I environmental labeling program for household cleaning products is being developed in accordance with ISO 14024, 1999. The Program Steering Committee has received conflicting feedback regarding the proposed criteria for biodegradability and the inclusion of a specific water consumption reduction target. Industry representatives argue that the biodegradability threshold is technically challenging and may disproportionately impact smaller manufacturers, while environmental advocacy groups contend that the water consumption target is insufficient to drive significant water conservation and should be more stringent. What is the most appropriate approach for the steering committee to reconcile these diverse stakeholder inputs while adhering to the principles of ISO 14024, 1999? Option A. Commission a new Comprehensive Life Cycle Assessment, LCA, for a representative range of cleaning products, and base all future criterion adjustments solely on the outcomes of this single LCA, regardless of ongoing stakeholder input. Option B. Implement the stricter water consumption target proposed by environmental groups and maintain the original biodegradability threshold, assuming that market demand will eventually drive industry adaptation. Option C. Initiate a formal review of the scientific literature and available data on biodegradability and water usage in the sector, followed by a series of targeted workshops with the dissenting stakeholder groups to collaboratively refine the criteria, potentially involving independent scientific review to validate proposed adjustments. Option D. Prioritize the feedback from the largest industry associations, as their compliance is crucial for the program's market penetration, and defer the water consumption target discussion to a later program review phase. The correct answer is C. Initiate a formal review of the scientific literature and available data on biodegradability and water usage in the sector, followed by a series of targeted workshops with the dissenting stakeholder groups to collaboratively refine the criteria, potentially involving independent scientific review to validate proposed adjustments. Explanation: the development of Type I environmental labeling programs under ISO 14024 requires a robust and transparent process for establishing environmental criteria. A key principle is the engagement of relevant stakeholders throughout the life cycle of the program, from initial concept to ongoing review. Stakeholder consultation is not merely a procedural step, but a fundamental mechanism for ensuring the credibility, relevance, and acceptance of the environmental criteria and the program itself. This involves identifying and consulting with a diverse group of interested parties, including industry associations, environmental organizations, consumer groups, government agencies, and scientific experts. The feedback gathered from these stakeholders informs the selection of product categories, the definition of environmental impact categories to be assessed, the establishment of specific performance thresholds, and the methodology for verification. For instance, input from industry can highlight technical feasibility and cost implications, while input from environmental groups can ensure that criteria address significant environmental concerns. Consumer groups provide insights into market perception and the clarity of labeling information. Government agencies may offer perspectives on alignment with existing regulations and policy objectives. The process should also incorporate mechanisms for addressing differing viewpoints and achieving consensus where possible, while maintaining the integrity and scientific basis of the criteria. This iterative engagement process, as outlined by ISO 14024, strengthens the program's legitimacy and its ability to drive meaningful environmental improvements. Question 26. Considering the principles of ISO 14024, 1999, for Type I environmental labeling, which of the following approaches best aligns with the requirement to establish environmental criteria based on significant impacts for a product category, using portable electronic devices as an example? Option A. Emphasizing the reduction of packaging materials and the use of biodegradable shipping containers, as these are visible environmental aspects to consumers, even if other life cycle stages have more substantial impacts. Option B. Focusing solely on the recyclability of the product at its end of life, as this is a widely recognized environmental concern for electronic goods, without a formal assessment of other life cycle stages. Option C. Prioritizing criteria related to energy efficiency during the use phase and the presence of recycled content in casings, informed by a preliminary life cycle assessment that identified these as primary environmental hotspots. Option D. Mandating the elimination of all potential hazardous substances from the product, irrespective of their actual environmental significance or the feasibility of substitution, to ensure maximum consumer safety. The correct answer is C. Prioritizing criteria related to energy efficiency during the use phase and the presence of recycled content in casings, informed by a preliminary life cycle assessment that identified these as primary environmental hotspots. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, concerning Type I environmental labeling, mandates a comprehensive life cycle approach for identifying and evaluating environmental aspects relevant to a product category. This process is fundamental to establishing meaningful environmental criteria for certification. The standard emphasizes that the selection of environmental criteria should be based on significant environmental impacts identified through a life cycle assessment, LCA, or equivalent methodology. For a hypothetical product category such as portable electronic devices, a thorough analysis would consider impacts across all life stages: raw material extraction, manufacturing, distribution, use, and end of life. Key environmental aspects typically include energy consumption during manufacturing and use, material sourcing, e.g., conflict minerals, recycled content, hazardous substances, e.g., heavy metals and components, flame retardants, water usage in manufacturing, and waste generation at end of life, e.g., e-waste, recyclability. The standard requires that the chosen criteria are scientifically sound, verifiable, and address the most significant environmental concerns for the product group, ensuring that the label provides credible and relevant information to consumers. It is crucial to distinguish between general environmental considerations and those specifically identified as significant for the product category under review, informed by an LCA or similar impact assessment. Question 27. Consider a Type I environmental labeling program established under ISO 14024, 1999. A key aspect of its credibility hinges on the operational framework of the entity responsible for verifying product compliance with the established environmental criteria. Which of the following best describes the fundamental requirement for this verifying entity to ensure the program's integrity and uphold the principles of independent third-party certification as mandated by the standard? Option A. The certifying body must possess demonstrable technical competence in the relevant product categories and operate impartially, free from undue influence from the product manufacturers or other stakeholders whose interests might compromise its objectivity. Option B. The certifying body can be an internal department of the manufacturing company, provided it has a separate reporting structure to the company's board of directors. Option C. The certifying body's primary function should be marketing and promotion of the labeled products, with verification serving as a secondary operational aspect. Option D. The certifying body should be the primary developer of the environmental criteria, ensuring alignment with their internal research and development priorities for product innovation. The correct answer is A. The certifying body must possess demonstrable technical competence in the relevant product categories and operate impartially, free from undue influence from the product manufacturers or other stakeholders whose interests might compromise its objectivity. Explanation: ISO 14024, 1999, specifically in its principles and procedures for Type I environmental labeling, emphasizes the crucial role of an independent third-party certification body in ensuring the credibility and reliability of environmental claims. This independence is paramount because it removes any potential bias or conflict of interest that might arise if the manufacturer or a related entity were to conduct the verification. The standard mandates that the certification body must be demonstrably competent, impartial, and operate in a transparent manner. This involves having clear procedures for selecting products, establishing environmental criteria, conducting assessments, and managing the labeling program. The third party's role is to objectively evaluate whether a product meets the predefined environmental criteria, which are typically based on life cycle considerations and are set by a multi-stakeholder body. This rigorous, unbiased assessment process is what provides assurance to consumers and stakeholders that the environmental label accurately reflects the product's environmental performance and that the claims are substantiated. Without this independent verification, the integrity of the Type I label would be compromised, potentially leading to greenwashing and a loss of consumer trust in eco-labeling schemes. The standard also outlines requirements for the certification body's structure, management, and operational procedures to maintain this independence and competence throughout the program's lifecycle. Question 28. Consider a scenario where a national environmental labeling program, designed in accordance with ISO 14024 principles, is seeking to certify a new line of biodegradable cleaning agents. The program owner has established detailed environmental criteria focusing on biodegradability, ecotoxicity, and packaging recyclability. What is the fundamental requirement for the entity responsible for confirming that a specific cleaning agent product meets these established criteria to maintain the integrity and credibility of the Type I label? Option A. The entity must be the program owner itself, as they possess the ultimate authority and understanding of the established environmental criteria. Option B. The entity must be a government regulatory body that has oversight of all product labeling, regardless of its voluntary nature. Option C. The entity must be demonstrably independent of both the product manufacturer and the program owner, possessing the necessary technical competence and impartiality to conduct the assessment. Option D. The entity must be a consumer advocacy group, ensuring that the product meets the expectations and perceptions of the end user regarding environmental friendliness. The correct answer is C. The entity must be demonstrably independent of both the product manufacturer and the program owner, possessing the necessary technical competence and impartiality to conduct the assessment. Explanation. The core principle of Type I environmental labeling under ISO 14024 is the establishment of a voluntary, third-party verified system that ensures products or services meet predefined environmental criteria throughout their life cycle. This verification process is crucial for the credibility and reliability of the label. Specifically, ISO 14024 mandates that the program owner must define clear, comprehensive, and scientifically sound environmental criteria. These criteria should address significant environmental aspects of the product category. The verification of a product's compliance with these criteria is undertaken by an independent third party. This independence is paramount to prevent conflicts of interest and to ensure objectivity. The third-party verifier conducts an assessment, which may involve reviewing documentation, conducting audits, and performing testing, to confirm that the product meets all specified environmental criteria. The program owner is responsible for establishing the procedures for this verification, including the qualifications of the verifiers and the methods used. The verification process is not a one-time event. It typically involves ongoing monitoring to ensure continued compliance. This continuous oversight is a key component of maintaining the integrity of the Type I label over time, differentiating it from self-declared claims. The program owner must also ensure transparency in the verification process and make the criteria and verification procedures publicly available. Question 29. When assessing a product for Type I environmental labeling under ISO 14024, 1999, what is the fundamental mechanism to guarantee that the reduced impact on ozone layer claim displayed on the label is both accurate and substantiated, thereby preventing consumer deception? Option A. Independent verification by a credible third-party certification body against predefined, life-cycle-based environmental criteria for ozone depletion potential. Option B. A consumer survey indicating a general perception that the product has a positive impact on the ozone layer. Option C. A statement from the product's marketing department confirming the absence of ozone-depleting chemicals based on historical production data. Option D. Manufacturer's internal quality control reports demonstrating compliance with industry best practices for ozone-depleting substance reduction. Correct answer is A. Independent verification by a credible third-party certification body against predefined life-cycle-based environmental criteria for ozone depletion potential. Explanation. ISO 14024, 1999, specifically within its Type I environmental labeling framework, mandates rigorous criteria to ensure that environmental claims made through eco-labels are accurate, verifiable, and not misleading to consumers. A cornerstone of this standard is the principle of third-party verification. This involves an independent and impartial body conducting an assessment of the product or service against predefined environmental criteria. These criteria must be transparent, based on scientific evidence, and cover the significant environmental aspects of the product's life cycle. The verification process confirms that the product or service meets these established criteria, thereby substantiating the claims communicated by the eco-label. Without this independent validation, an eco-label would merely be a self-declaration, susceptible to greenwashing and lacking credibility. The standard also emphasizes the importance of ongoing monitoring and review of certified products to ensure continued compliance, further safeguarding against misleading information. The ultimate goal is to provide consumers with reliable information that enables them to make environmentally informed purchasing decisions. Question 30. When developing a product category rule, PCR, for a Type I environmental labeling program under ISO 14024, what is the primary consideration for defining the boundaries of the product category to ensure the label's integrity and comparability? Option A. Focusing solely on the manufacturing phase of products, as this is often where the most significant environmental impacts are perceived to occur. To simplify the PCR development process. Option B. Establishing criteria that allow for significant variations in the environmental assessment methods used for different products within the same category to accommodate diverse manufacturing processes. Option C. Ensuring that all products within the defined category perform a similar function and can be compared based on a consistent set of environmental criteria and assessment methodologies throughout their life cycle. Option D. Prioritizing the inclusion of a wide range of products that may have tangential environmental benefits, even if their core functionality or primary environmental impacts differ significantly. Correct answer is C. Ensuring that all products within the defined category perform a similar function and can be compared based on a consistent set of environmental criteria and assessment methodologies throughout their life cycle. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 14024 Type I environmental labeling is the establishment of a comprehensive product category rule, PCR, that defines the scope of environmental assessment for a specific group of products. The PCR must clearly delineate the product category, ensuring that all products within that category are evaluated using the same set of environmental criteria and assessment methodologies. This ensures comparability and prevents greenwashing by allowing consumers to make informed choices based on consistent environmental performance within a defined market segment. The selection of the product category is a foundational step that dictates the entire life cycle assessment (LCA) approach, including the identification of relevant environmental impacts, the definition of functional units, and the setting of performance criteria for the environmental label. A well-defined PCR is crucial for the credibility and integrity of the Type I label, as it ensures that the environmental claims are substantiated within a relevant and comparable framework. The process involves identifying products that perform a similar function and have comparable environmental impacts throughout their life cycles. This often requires consultation with stakeholders, including industry, government, and consumer groups, to ensure the PCR accurately reflects market realities and environmental priorities. The scope of the PCR must be sufficiently narrow to allow for meaningful differentiation based on environmental performance, yet broad enough to encompass a commercially relevant group of products.